Hi, BookTube, it's Amy, and I'm back reading from The Anatomy of Bibliomania by Holbrook Jackson. It's a snowy Sunday evening as I'm filming this. This will go up on Monday morning, I'm thinking, but it is a beautiful Christmassy evening. I've just come from seeing the Nutcracker, and I thought I would settle down in front of the tree with the snow falling, still in my black velvet here, and do a little bit of reading. We're on page 341 today with a section titled Bookmen and Their Little Libraries. Great readers and lovers of books depend not always upon libraries. Some of the most indefatigable devourers of literature have very few books, and the libraries of writers are as like as not the tools of their craft. The books about books, the books about books about books, and so ad infinitum. Shelley held that a good library consists of the Greek plays, Plato, Lord Bacon's works, Shakespeare, the old dramatists, Milton, Goethe, Schiller, Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, Machiavelli, Guicciardini, Calderon, and last yet first, the Bible. Extent of books is no mark of the love of what it is in them. All the world is in one great book, for it reflects a man within whom is everything. All the stars and all the heavens and vast hell itself, which none knew better than Shelley, and many would support his choice in the past as in our time. Rich or poor, it matters not. Wealth is in books, not in that which buys them. I wonder often what the vintners buy, one half so precious as the stuff they sell. All the books in the world that are really books, claimed Richard Jefferies, can be bought for £10. Man's whole thought for the whole of a watch or a good dog. The library of the Emperor Severus consisted of Horace, Virgil, Plato, and Cicero. Richard of London, an abbot of Peterborough in the 13th century, had a private library of 10 books. When Boswell visited Pascal Paoli, he was diverted with the Corsican patriot's English library, which consisted of some broken volumes of The Spectator and Tatler, Pope's Essay on Man, Gulliver's Travels, A History of France in Old English, and Barclay's Apology for the Quakers. John Bunyan's library consisted of the Bible, a parcel of books, chiefly Pilgrim's Progress, and others written by himself. Ben Jonson had few books, but, as was said of himself, they were like great Spanish galleons, bulky folios with "Some Ben Jonson" boldly inscribed in them. Hazlitt, said Leigh Hunt, has no books except mine, but he has Shakespeare and Rousseau by heart, and although William Cowper had never been able to live without books since he first knew his letters, he told Lady Hesketh that he had no books of his own, and welcomed Throckmorton's generosity in giving him possession of his library, an acquisition of great value to me, he adds. Shakespeare, Voltaire, Humboldt, Comte, Goethe, although ardent book lovers, had no collection of books to which the new library could fairly be applied, and Lord Burleigh, Grotius, and Bonaparte are said to have carried their libraries in their pockets. Leigh Hunt disliked a grand library, one of those immense apartments with books all in museum order, especially wire-safed. He had nothing against the museum itself or public libraries, holding them to be capital places to go, but not to sit in. He hated to read in public or amongst strangers, and resented the jealous silence, the dissatisfied looks of the messengers, the inability to help yourself, the not knowing whether you really ought to trouble the messengers, much less the gentleman in black or brown, who is perhaps half a trustee. A great library made Swift melancholy, and he valued in his own little library the compliments of Gravius and Gronvius, which made 31 volumes in folio, given me by my Lord Bolingbroke, more than all books besides, because whoever comes into my closet casts his eyes immediately upon them, and will not vouchsafe to look upon Plato and Xenophon. I might here insert many opinions, but they all tend to one conclusion. Books are not entirely valued or intimately loved unless they are ranged about us as we sit at home. And he, our footnote pointing us to Edmund Gosse in Library of Edmund Gosse, and he quotes out of a French authority, studying at a public library is like staying at an inn, a convenience, not a preference. These are the general notions of bookmen, especially those that are true bibliophiles, and they will support Macaulay in his surprise at the low visibility of books, if I may use a meteorological phrase, at the Vatican Library when he visited it in 1838. I had not the faintest notion I was in it. He writes, no books, no shelves were visible. All the light was brilliant, nothing but white and red and gold, blazing arabesques and paintings on ceilings and wall. He was surprised because he had imagined the Vatican as a far sterner and darker Bodleian, and when he realized that the books and manuscripts were in wooden cases ranged round the walls, and saw the cases painted in light colors to harmonize with the gay aspects of everything around them, he said they might be musical instruments, masquerade dresses, or china for the dances and the suppers, for which the apartments seemed to be meant. They bore, however, inscriptions more suited to his notions of the place. But he would have been less surprised and better pleased with the sight of books, as what bookmen would not. Benjamin Robert Hayden possessed a room of many books, but he read in comfort only in his painting room, smelling of paint as it does, where he brought down and placed on the top of his desk about half a dozen favorites, Milton, Shakespeare, Dante, Tasso, Homer, Vasari, and above all, the Bible and the Testament always to refer to, and Wordsworth. Charles Lamb had few books for so great a reader. He loved his ragged veterans, and, says Crabb Robinson, throws away all modern books, but retains even the trash he liked when a boy. His collection, Leigh Hunt records, looks like what it is, a selection made at precious intervals from the bookstalls. Now a Chaucer at 9 and 2 pence, now a Montaigne or a Sir Thomas Browne at 2 shillings, now a Jeremy Taylor, a Spinoza, an old English dramatist, Prior and Sir Philip Sidney. There Mr. Southey takes his place again with an old radical friend. There Jeremy Collier is at peace with Dryden. There the lion Martin Luther lies down with the Quaker lamb. Sewell. There Guzman Delfarge thinks himself fit company for Sir Charles Grandison, and has his claims admitted. The 200 or 300 volumes, which were all Wordsworth's store, occupied Thomas de Quincey's records, a little homely painted bookcase fixed in one of 2 shallow recesses beside the chimney in his little sitting room at Grasmere. The books were ill-bound or not bound at all in boards, sometimes in tatters. Many were imperfect as to the number of volumes, mutilated as to the number of pages, sometimes, where it seemed worthwhile, the defects being supplied by manuscript, sometimes not. Sir Walter Scott, on the other hand, gathered about him a noble library rich in the works of poets and magicians, of alchemists and anecdotists. For many years Sidney Smith's books occupied only the end of his little dining room, but as soon as more prosperous times came, they boldly spread themselves over 3 sides of a pretty odd room dignified by the name of library. About 28 feet long and 8 feet high, ending in a bay window supported by pillars, looking into the garden, which he had obtained by throwing a pantry, a passage, and a shoe-hole together. In this pretty gay room, records his daughter, we breakfasted. He sat, and when alone, we spent the evening with him. De Maistre confessed that his library was composed of novels and a few poets enshrined among the bric-a-brac in his curious and romantic room. The library of the poet Gray was very curious, as it contained a complete collection of Mr. Gray's books from his earliest age, from the school books and the books in which the first rude essays and dramatists, or rather drawings, were made, in his latest and favourite studies in the Nervus Naturale of Linnaeus. More curious still was the library of Edward Fitzgerald, who would bind up only those pages of an author who gave him pleasure. Among the books thus whimsically truncated, Crabbe's Poems was a favourite piece, and for farther example, Carlyle's Past and Present, from which he divorced the chapter on the ancient monk, because he liked it best and bound it in half morocco with the title Carlyle's Monk. Richard de Bury had more books than all the other bishops in England. He set up permanent libraries at his manor house and at his palace at Auckland. The floor of his hall was so strewn with manuscripts that it was so hard to reach his presence, and his bedroom was so full that it was not easy to get in or out or even to stand still without treading on them. So also lived that great scholar, Sir Thomas More, besieged by books. "It is incredible," wrote Erasmus, "what a thick crop of old books spread out on every side. There is so much erudition, not an ordinary kind, but recondite and accurate and antique, both in Greek and Latin, that you need not go to Italy except for the pleasure of travelling." Montaigne's library was situated on the third story of the tower of his chateau, above the main entrance, from whence he could see his garden. Thus he was in the way of achieving Cicero's idea of happiness, a library in a garden. The form of it was round, with no flat side, save for his desk and chair, from which he says, "At one look it offereth me the full sight of all my books, set round upon shelves or desks, 5 ranks, one upon another." There he spent his summer days, writing his essays, dreaming, or browsing upon his books without order, without method, and by piecemeals turning over and ransacking, now one book and now another. Dr. Johnson's book room was up 4 pairs of stairs in an attic in his house in Gough Square. His window overlooked no garden, but it opened up a noble view of St. Paul's Cathedral, which gave him more joy than any other more natural prospect. The books were dusty and in great confusion, the floor strewn with manuscripts, which Boswell beheld with a degree of veneration, as well he might, supposing they perhaps might contain portions of the Rambler or of Rasselas. On 3rd April 1776, he found Johnson busy putting his books in order, and as they were generally very old ones, clouds of dust were flying around him. He had on a pair of gloves such as hedgers use, and this spectacle put him in mind of his uncle Dr. Boswell's description of him, a robust genius born to grapple with whole libraries. Petrarch, like Herber, collected libraries around himself wherever he went, one at Vaucluse near Avignon, whither he went in 1337, and another at Parma, which he called his second Parnassus. Gibbon called his library a fine cabinet de particular. Not content with filling up my double shelves, he tells Daverdon, the best room chosen for it, it has overflowed into the one over the street, into your old bedroom, into mine, into my nook in the Bentinck Saint Abode, and even into a cottage which I presented myself with at Hampton Court. The 1,000 courtiers round me in a ring, my refuge is my palace, there I reign as king. The groundwork of his collection consisted of the pick of the Greek, Latin, Italian, French, and English company, and those authors best esteemed by men of taste, and the ecclesiastics, the Byzantines, Orientals, all necessary to the historian of the decadence. Isaac Disraeli's collection was so vast, says Crocker, that when it was removed it filled 70 cases. Well may Benjamin Disraeli have held that he was born in a library. For the most part, bookmen are particular and curious, especially those of the writing sort. If they can read anywhere for pastime and dalliance, as I have dilated, they can study or compose themselves for the work of writing, for the most part only in special places or surroundings. Leigh Hunt disliked a fine, large study. He liked space to breathe and walk about when he wanted to breathe and walk about, and for those exercises a great library, next to study, suited him best. But for the study itself, give me, he asks, a small, snug place, almost entirely walled with books, and one window, looking upon trees. Some prefer a place with no books, nothing but a chair or a table, as Epictetus. Coventry Patmore, although a great reader, was never fond of having more books in his study than those in use at the time. Hazlitt would argue that these were philosophers, not lovers of books. But he did not recall that Montaigne was both. Leigh Hunt, on the other hand, never forgot his books. Even when writing, he had them in a sort of sidelong mind's eye, like a second thought, which is none, like a waterfall or a whispering wind. He liked to be near a bookcase affectionately open, and thus kindly enclosed, with his books and green leaves he could write. Thomas Carlyle worked in a little upper room in Cheyenne Row, Chelsea, projecting off from his bedroom, 7 feet by 8 feet, with a window looking out upon gardens, trees, and houses at a distance. But no furniture save his desk and chair and a shelf of books. Here he sat, lifted above the noise of the world, peremptory to let no mortal enter upon his privacy. The greater part of his library was kept in a larger living room on a lower story of the house. Mark Rutherford visited the philosopher in the year 1868 and found him at breakfast in his room. Everything, he reports, was in exact order. No dust or confusion, and the books on the shelves were arranged with perfect evenness. He noticed that when Carlyle replaced a book, he took pains to get it level with the others. John Wilson Crocker had a book drawing room full of angles and irregularities, which held 3,000 volumes, was warm and comfortable, and had none of the somber formality of a library. But he worked in a little den of 1,000 volumes. Gibbon worked at the Decline and Fall in a little arbor overlooking the lake at Lausanne, taking with him from his library the books he needed for the day's work. Coleridge's study at Keswick, Charles Lamb records in a letter to Thomas Manning, was a large, antique, ill-shaped room with an old-fashioned organ never played upon, big enough for a church, shelves of scattered folios, an aeolian harp, and an old sofa, half-bed, etc., and all looking out upon the last fading view of Skiddaw and his broad-breasted brethren. Among our modern poets, Lionel Johnson was a notable bookman. He had a considerable library, says W.B. Yeats, far larger than that of any young man of his acquaintance, so large that he wondered if it might not be possible to find some way of hanging new shelves from the ceiling like chandeliers. That room, it was in Charlotte Street, was ever a pleasure to Yeats, with its curtains of grey corduroy over door and window and bookcase, and its walls covered with brown paper. There was a portrait of Cardinal Newman, looking a little like Johnson himself, some religious pictures by Simeon Solomon, and works upon theology in Greek and Latin, and a general air of neatness and severity. And talking there by candlelight, it never seemed very difficult to murmur Villiers de L'Isle's Adam's proud words. As for living, our servants will do that for us. Some have their libraries in the common sitting room, which Leigh Hunt thought hospitable. Thus, when Charles Lamb left Covent Garden for Colebricks Row, Islington for his white cottage overlooking the New River and a spacious garden with vines, I assure you, pears, strawberries, parsnips, leeks, carrots, cabbages, to delight the heart of old Alconius, he entered without passage into a cheerful dining room, all studded over and rough with old books, our footnote pointing us to letters in an Everyman edition. Wordsworth's few tattered books were on a shelf in the sitting room at Dove Cottage, but there was a library at Rydal. A visitor asked to see the poet's study. The servant, he told Crab Robinson, took him to the library and said, "This is master's library, but he studies in the fields." Sir Walter Scott worked in his library at Abbotsford, where he loved to dally among his books for recreation, tasting this or that volume, or arranging or cataloguing. Before breakfast, I employed myself in airing my old bibliomanical hobby, entering all the books lately acquired into a temporary catalogue so as to have them shelved and marked. Our footnote pointing us to his journal. And where are we at? There we are. Many bibliophiles take a special delight in thus pottering among their books, changing them from one shelf to another, rearranging, grouping, and regrouping for convenience or appearance, or just for the pleasure of handling them. Some have elaborate systems of classification in which much discretion must be used. Rimsky-Korsakov a sergeant of the guards who succeeded Loretz in the affections of Catherine II, Empress of Russia, gave the following order to his bookseller, saith William Davis: "Fit me up a handsome library, little books above and great ones below." 'Tis a method adopted in all times, as he records the instruction of a later bibliophile. "Range me," he said, "the grenadiers, folios, at bottom, battalions, octavos, in the middle, and light bobs, duodecimos, at top." There are others who try diverse methods, but they are usually forced back to the simple tenet of arrangement by sizes. I have tried to arrange my books by subject or alphabetically by author's name, saith one, but it always ends in my arranging them by sizes. And he sets out a prime reason that a book placed alongside one that is higher and wider causes bulging where the taller book is not fully held, and the slightest bulge admits dust. But I find no golden rule, each to his taste. And I certainly do not arrange my books by size. Mine are loosely arranged by subject matters and authors. Whatever I have a mental association with is usually how they end up on the shelf. But that's the end of that reading for today. We're on page 347 now. Our next section is titled "On Choosing a Library for a Desert Island," which brings to mind the series of videos done by Sean D. Standfast on desert island books. What books would you take to a desert island? We'll see what this is all about here in our next reading when we come back in the next video.